Hi, Reddit. I never thought I'd be here, but I guess life has a way of throwing curveballs that leave you completely dumbfounded. My name's Eric, and I've been married to Rachel for 6 years. She's smart, driven, and well, a bit of a diva if I'm being honest. She likes the spotlight, thrives on attention, and has a knack for twisting situations to suit her narrative. I used to find it charming, her ability to command a room, but now I'm starting to see the cracks. Let me rewind a bit. Everything seemed fine, or at least that's what I thought. We both worked long hours, me in IT, and her as a marketing manager for some flashy corporation. Rachel loved her job, mainly because she was surrounded by successful people, especially men who adored her quick wit and confident demeanor. I trusted her. Sure, she was flirty, but I figured that came with her personality. Until one night, she dropped a bombshell that blew my entire world apart. It was a regular Thursday evening. I was slumped on the couch, exhausted from troubleshooting servers all day, while Rachel was bustling around the kitchen with her glass of wine. She had this giddy energy about her, which I assumed was from landing another big account at work. But then, out of nowhere, she strolled into the living room, perched on the armrest of the couch, and said the words that would change everything. "Eric, I need to talk to you about something. It's important." Her tone was oddly casual, like she was asking me to pick up milk on my way home. I muted the TV and turned to face her, immediately sensing that this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. "Sure, what's up?" I asked, trying to mask the unease creeping into my stomach. "I have a request, and before you say anything, just hear me out, okay?" "Okay," I said slowly. She took a deep breath, her blue eyes locking onto mine with an intensity one hadn't seen before. "There's this colleague at work. His name is Josh. He's tall, charming, incredibly talented, and, well, he's been showing some interest in me." I blinked. "What?" "Let me finish," she said, holding up a hand. "I'm not saying I've done anything, but I've been thinking, what if, just for one night, I explored what it would be like to be with someone like him?" For a moment, I thought she was joking. I actually laughed, a short, awkward chuckle, but her face remained serious, and that's when it hit me. She wasn't kidding. "You're asking me for a free pass?" I said, my voice cracking slightly. She nodded, her expression infuriatingly calm. "Eric, I think it's healthy for couples to explore new experiences sometimes. It doesn't mean I love you any less. It's just curiosity. I'm being honest with you because I respect our marriage." Respect our marriage? The sheer audacity of those words made my head spin. "Rachel, are you out of your mind?" I stammered. "You're asking me to let you sleep with another man, like it's some kind of experiment?" She sighed, like I was the unreasonable one. "I knew you'd react this way. This is why most people lie about these things. I thought you'd appreciate my honesty." Honesty. Right. That's what she was selling this as. "Rachel, this isn't honesty. It's betrayal. Do you even hear yourself?" "Eric, you're being so dramatic," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's one night. One night. It wouldn't even mean anything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "And what happens after this one night? You think we just go back to normal? Pretend it never happened?" She shrugged. "Why not? People do it all the time. It's not a big deal unless you make it one." I was too stunned to respond. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of them coherent. How long had she been thinking about this? How long had she been fantasizing about this Josh guy while lying in bed next to me? And why the hell did she think I'd be okay with any of it? "Eric," she said softly, her tone suddenly shifting to one of fake concern. "I love you. I really do. But I also need to feel alive. Don't you want me to be happy?" Oh, the irony. She was throwing the happiness card at me while proposing the most selfish, degrading thing I'd ever heard. My gut reaction was to scream, to throw her wine glass against the wall, to demand she pack her bags and leave. But instead, I just sat there, frozen in place, like the spineless idiot she clearly thought I was. I need some air," I finally muttered, grabbing my jacket and heading for the door. She didn't stop me. Of course, she didn't. Why would she? She'd already made up her mind. As I walked aimlessly through our neighborhood, the cold night air stinging my face, I couldn't shake the sickening feeling in my chest. Rachel wasn't just asking for a night off. She was testing me, seeing how far she could push before I broke. And the worst part? A small, pathetic part of me was considering it. Not because I wanted her to do it, but because I was terrified of losing her if I said no. When I finally returned home, Rachel was already in bed, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I crawled under the covers, my mind still racing, and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. The next morning, she acted like everything was fine. She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her coffee, and headed off to work without so much as a mention of our conversation. Meanwhile, I felt like my entire world was unraveling. That was just the beginning. Things were about to get a whole lot worse. The next few days passed in a haze. Rachel acted like nothing had happened, as if her absurd request had been a fleeting thought, not the grenade she'd lobbed into our marriage. But I couldn't let it go. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the arrogance in her eyes when she talked about this Josh guy, as if she was doing me a favor by asking for permission instead of sneaking around. I tried to bring it up once, casually, over dinner. So, about the other night. That whole thing with Josh, Rachel didn't even let me finish. Eric, we talked about this. I don't want to fight. Let's just drop it, okay? Drop it? Like it was a broken plate or a bad haircut. I wanted to press her, demand answers, but her tone left no room for discussion. It was clear she decided the conversation was over, whether I liked it or not. That night, I found myself spiraling. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured her with him. This tall, charming, faceless man who had apparently ignited something in her that I never could. Was I really that inadequate? Was this my fault? I started obsessing, scrolling through Rachel's social media late at night, looking for clues. I knew she posted pictures with her colleagues at work events, but I'd never paid much attention to the faces in the background. Now, I scrutinized every single photo, trying to figure out which one was Josh. Tall, charming, talented. How many of those adjectives could I match to the men standing next to her? One photo caught my eye. It was from a recent work conference. Rachel was standing next to a guy who had Josh written all over him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a smug grin that made my stomach turn. He was leaning a little too close to her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Rachel, of course, looked radiant, smiling like she'd just won an award. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen, bile rising in my throat. The next morning, I couldn't keep it in any longer. As Rachel was sipping her coffee and scrolling through her phone, I blurted it out. "Do you have feelings for him?" She looked up, her face a mask of innocence. "Who?" "Josh," I said, my voice shaking. "Do you have feelings for him? Because the way you talk about him, the way you look at him in photos, it doesn't seem like just curiosity." Rachel's expression hardened. "Eric, you're being ridiculous." "Am I?" I snapped, the anger bubbling to the surface. "Because it feels like you've already made up your mind about this. You've already decided that our marriage isn't enough for you." She set her mug down with a loud clink. "You're overthinking this, as usual. Josh is a coworker. That's it. I told you, this was just an idea, a way to keep things exciting. But if you're going to keep harping on it, maybe I should take that night, just to prove it's not a big deal." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So, what? You're threatening me now?" "No, Eric," she said, rolling her eyes. "I'm trying to show you that you're making something out of nothing. But if you're too insecure to handle it, that's your problem, not mine." The sheer arrogance in her voice made my blood boil. I felt like I was losing my grip, like I was being gaslit into believing I was the unreasonable one. But deep down, I knew the truth. Rachel didn't care about how this made me feel. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. That evening, something in me snapped. I decided I wasn't going to sit around waiting for Rachel to make up her mind about whether our marriage was worth saving. If she wanted her one night, she could have it, but not without consequences. When Rachel came home from work, I was calm. Too calm, probably. I greeted her with a smile, cooked her favorite dinner, and even poured her a glass of wine. She was suspicious at first, but by the time we sat down to eat, she seemed to let her guard down. "Rachel," I said, keeping my tone light, "about what you said the other night, I've been thinking." She raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of wine. "Oh? I've decided you should go." Her fork froze midway to her mouth. "What?" "You should go," I repeated, my voice steady. "If this is something you need to do to feel fulfilled, I won't stop you. But there's one condition." Her eyes narrowed. "What condition?" "If you leave this house to be with him, even for one night, you don't come back." She blinked, clearly taken aback. "Eric, don't be ridiculous. You can't just throw me out over something like this." "It's not me throwing you out, Rachel. It's you making a choice. If you choose him, even for a night, you're choosing to leave this marriage. That's your call, not mine." For the first time, Rachel looked uncertain. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Finally, she set her fork down and pushed her plate away. "You're being so dramatic," she muttered, standing up and grabbing her wine glass. "I don't even know why I married someone so weak." Her words stung, but I didn't react. Instead, I watched as she stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stayed at the table for a long time, staring at my half-eaten dinner and wondering how the hell we'd gotten here. When I finally went to bed, Rachel was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. I lay awake for hours, my mind racing. I didn't know what she was going to do, but one thing was clear. This was a line we couldn't uncross. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I even cared anymore. The next morning, Rachel's attitude had shifted. She was unusually quiet, sipping her coffee in the kitchen while scrolling through her phone. I watched her from across the room, unsure of what to expect. The tension between us was palpable, like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. Finally, she broke the silence. "So, is that how it's going to be? You're giving me some kind of ultimatum?" I put down my mug and met her gaze. "It's not an ultimatum, Rachel. It's reality. You made your intentions clear. I'm just telling you what happens if you go through with it." She rolled her eyes, her go-to move whenever she wanted to dismiss me. "You're being ridiculous. You're acting like I'm packing my bags and moving in with Josh. It's one night, Eric. One night. You're blowing this out of proportion." "Am I?" I shot back, my voice firmer than I expected. "Because to me, it sounds like you've already made your choice." She scoffed, grabbing her purse. "I don't have time for this. I'll be late for work." And with that, she was out the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The rest of the day was a blur. I couldn't focus on anything, not work, not the bills, not even the show I usually use to distract myself. All I could think about was Rachel and the sinking feeling that our marriage was on its last legs. Part of me still hoped she'd come to her senses, but another part of me, the part that had been hurt too many times, was ready for the inevitable. That evening, she came home later than usual. Her face was flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, and she smelled faintly of wine. I didn't need to ask where she'd been. I already knew. "Long day?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She shrugged, kicking off her heels. "We had a team meeting. Went a little late." I didn't believe her for a second, but I didn't press. Instead, I waited until after dinner to bring it up. "Rachel," I said as we sat on the couch, "I need to know, are you going to see him?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the TV, her jaw tightening. Finally, she let out a long sigh. "I don't know, Eric. Maybe." That single word hit me like a freight train. Maybe. Not a denial. Not a reassurance. Just maybe. "Do you even care about this marriage?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes flicked toward me, cold and distant. "Of course I care, but I can't keep living like this, Eric. You're boring. Predictable. I need excitement, passion, something I haven't felt in years." The words cut deeper than I thought possible. "So, that's it?" You're willing to throw away 6 years of marriage because you're bored? Don't twist my words, she snapped. I'm trying to be honest with you, and all you do is guilt-trip me. Do you think I want to feel this way? Do you think I like the idea of stepping out on my marriage? I'm trying to find a way to fix this, but you're making it impossible. Fix this? I repeated, incredulous. By sleeping with another man? She stood up, arms crossed. I'm done talking about this. You want an answer? Fine. I'll let you know when I've made up my mind. That night, I didn't even bother going to bed. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling and wondering how the woman I'd fallen in love with had turned into someone I barely recognized. Somewhere along the way, Rachel had stopped seeing me as her partner and started seeing me as an obstacle, a stepping stone to something better. And the worst part? I was starting to believe her. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Rachel rummaging through the closet. When I walked into the bedroom, she was packing a small overnight bag. What's this? I asked, my throat dry. She didn't look at me. I need some space. I'm going to a hotel for the night. Clear my head. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. And Josh? Will he be there too? Her pause said everything I needed to know. Rachel, I said, my voice trembling, if you walk out that door, don't expect to come back. She zipped up her bag and finally turned to face me. Don't be so dramatic, Eric. I'm not ending anything. I just need time. But I knew better. This wasn't about time. This was about testing the waters, seeing if the grass really was greener on the other side. And I wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to make up her mind. Go, I said, my voice cold. But don't bother coming back. Your things will be waiting for you. In the trash? Her eyes widened in shock, but she quickly recovered, her expression hardening. Fine, if that's how you want to play it. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a moment, frozen in place, before the weight of it all came crashing down. My marriage was over. But if Rachel thought she was walking away without consequences, she was sorely mistaken. After Rachel stormed out, the house felt eerily quiet. The kind of silence that clings to you, heavy and suffocating. I stood there in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, staring at the space where she had been. She was gone. She had made her choice. And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't have to wait for her to decide whether I was worthy of being her husband. I wasn't going to sit around and let her treat me like a doormat anymore. If she wanted her one night, she'd get it. But she'd also get a wake-up call she wouldn't forget. I spent the next couple of hours packing her things. Clothes, shoes, makeup, all the designer handbags she insisted on buying with our money. I didn't bother folding anything. Why should I? She'd already crumpled up our marriage and tossed it aside like garbage. It only seemed fitting that her belongings would get the same treatment. By the time I was done, the living room looked like a battlefield. Her stuff was piled into black trash bags, some spilling over with her ridiculously expensive wardrobe. I dragged them outside, one by one, dumping them next to the trash cans at the curb. It was petty, sure, but it felt damn good. While I worked, my mind raced with questions. Where had she gone? Was she really at a hotel? Or was she with him? The thought of her with Josh, laughing, drinking, touching, made my stomach turn. But then I reminded myself, this wasn't my problem anymore. She had chosen her path, and I wasn't going to follow her down it. Once everything was outside, I went back in and grabbed her wedding dress from the closet. It was still in its garment bag, pristine and untouched since our wedding day. I stared at it for a moment, remembering how beautiful she had looked in it, how happy I had been, thinking I'd found the person I'd spend the rest of my life with. Then I carried it outside and threw it on top of the trash bags. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. I ignored it at first, groggy and disoriented, but it kept going off. Finally, I grabbed it and saw a string of missed calls and text messages from Rachel. Rachel, what the hell is wrong with you? Rachel, did you seriously throw my stuff outside? Rachel, Eric, answer me. I didn't respond. What was there to say? She'd made her bed, and now she could lie in it, wherever that might be. About an hour later, I heard the screech of tires outside. I peeked through the curtains and saw Rachel's car pull up to the curb. She got out, wearing the same clothes as the night before, her hair a mess. She looked furious. She marched up to the trash pile, staring at it in disbelief before storming to the front door. I opened it before she could start banging. "What the hell is this?" she yelled, gesturing to the trash bags. "Are you out of your mind?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm just following through on what I told you." "You walked out that door, Rachel. This is what happens when you choose someone else over your marriage." Her face twisted with anger. "This is so childish, Eric. Do you have any idea how ridiculous you look right now?" "Oh, I look ridiculous?" I shot back. "You're the one who asked for a free pass to cheat, and I'm the ridiculous one?" She crossed her arms, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're overreacting. I told you, it was just one night. It didn't even mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I laughed bitterly. "You left your husband, Rachel. You walked out of our home to be with another man. That means everything." Her expression shifted then, her anger giving way to something colder. "Fine," she said, her voice low. "If that's how you want to play it, I'll take my things and leave. But don't think for a second you'll come out of this looking like the victim." "Victim?" I stepped closer, my voice rising. "I'm not trying to be the victim, Rachel. I'm trying to protect what little dignity I have left after everything you've done." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and started gathering her things from the trash pile, throwing the bags into the trunk of her car with more force than necessary. Neighbors began peeking out their windows, watching the scene unfold. I didn't care. Let them see. Let them know the kind of person Rachel really was. Once the car was loaded, she slammed the trunk shut and turned to face me. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You're going to miss me, Eric. And when you do, don't bother calling, because I won't be here." "Good," I said. "I don't want you here." She stared at me for a moment, as if trying to find the words to hurt me one last time. But instead, she got in her car and drove off, leaving me standing there in the driveway. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, I had taken back a small piece of control, and that was enough to keep me standing. Little did I know, the storm was far from over. Rachel wasn't done with me yet, and the worst was still to come. For the next few days, I thought Rachel was gone for good. She hadn't called, texted, or tried to show up at the house again. The quiet was unnerving, but also strangely comforting. I finally had time to think, to really process what had happened. But Rachel wasn't the type to let things go. She thrived on control, and the fact that I'd taken some of that away from her must have driven her insane. I should have known she was planning her next move. I just didn't expect her to strike so soon, or so viciously. It started with a call from my boss. I was in the middle of an IT audit when his name popped up on my phone. "Eric, we need to talk," he said as soon as I answered. "Sure," I replied, already feeling a knot form in my stomach. "What's going on?" He sighed. "I got an email this morning. It was about you, from someone named Rachel." My blood ran cold. "What did it say?" There was a pause, and then he continued, "She sent let's call it a character evaluation. Claims you've been emotionally unstable and might be sabotaging the company." She attached screenshots of some texts. I don't know the context, but they don't paint a great picture. "What?" I sputtered. "That's ridiculous. She's my wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife. She's trying to mess with me." "I figured as much," he said. "But you need to clean this up, Eric. It's bad optics. The higher-ups are already asking questions." I hung up, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Rachel was trying to ruin my career now? For what? Kicking her out after she decided to cheat? My hands shook as I scrolled through my messages, trying to figure out what she'd sent. And then I found it, a conversation from months ago where I'd vented about hating my job. She must have screenshotted it when I wasn't paying attention. I called her immediately. To my surprise, she answered on the first ring. "Well, hello, Eric," she said, her tone dripping with smugness. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I yelled. You're trying to get me fired now? She laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Oh, relax. I just wanted to remind you that actions have consequences. You humiliated me, Eric. You threw my stuff in the trash like I was garbage. Did you really think I'd let that slide? You brought this on yourself, Rachel, I snapped. You're the one who wanted to cheat. You're the one who left. And you're the one who decided to make it public, she shot back. So now, we're even. Even? I laughed bitterly. You think we're even? You've crossed the line, Rachel. Then maybe you should have thought about that before playing the victim, she said, her voice turning icy. I told you, Eric. You'll regret this. The hits kept coming. Over the next few days, Rachel unleashed a full-blown smear campaign against me. She called our mutual friends, spinning the story to make herself look like the victim. According to her, I was a controlling, emotionally abusive husband who'd snapped when she tried to have an honest conversation about our relationship. She conveniently left out the part where she'd asked for permission to cheat. Some people believed her. I started noticing fewer texts from friends, fewer likes on social media posts. Even my mom called to ask what was going on, clearly confused by the version of events Rachel had fed her. You know this isn't true, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I know, honey, Mom replied, but Rachel's very convincing. You need to set the record straight. But how? Every time I tried to explain my side of the story, it felt like I was shouting into a void. Rachel was louder, flashier, more charismatic. She had always been better at winning people over, and now she was using that to destroy me. One night, I came home from work to find a piece of paper taped to the front door. It was a court notice. Rachel was filing for divorce, and she wasn't pulling any punches. The papers accused me of emotional cruelty, neglect, and even financial misconduct. She wanted half of everything, including the house. I felt my knees buckle as I read through the document. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. Rachel was trying to take everything I had, and she might actually succeed. But I wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Alan, a sharp, no-nonsense guy who came highly recommended. I laid everything out for him. The cheating, the ultimatum, the trash bags, and now the divorce papers. He nodded thoughtfully as I spoke, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Rachel sounds like a textbook narcissist, he said. This isn't about the divorce. It's about control. She's trying to crush you because she can't stand the idea of losing power. So, what do? I asked, my voice shaky. We fight back, he said simply. But first, we need leverage. Anything that can prove she's been lying or acting in bad faith. Emails, texts, financial records, anything. My mind raced. Rachel was careful, always making sure to cover her tracks. But she wasn't perfect. Somewhere in her web of lies, there had to be a loose thread. I just needed to find it. That evening, I started digging. I combed through old messages, photos, and emails, looking for anything that might help. And then, buried in her sent folder, I found it. An email exchange between Rachel and Josh. The subject line read, "Tonight?" The body of the message was short but damning. Rachel, I'm all yours after 8. Can't wait. Winky face. She'd sent it the night she claimed to be clearing her head at a hotel. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. This was it. Proof that she'd lied. Not just to me, but to everyone she'd been manipulating. I forwarded the emails to Alan immediately. He responded within minutes. Alan, this is gold. Don't confront her yet. Let me handle it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Rachel might have started this war, but I was finally ready to fight back. And the best part? She had no idea what was coming. The email exchange between Rachel and Josh was a game changer. It wasn't just leverage. It was the smoking gun I needed to turn the tide. For days, I worked closely with Alan to build a case that would expose Rachel for the liar she was. He assured me that we had a solid shot at not only protecting my assets, but also flipping the narrative she'd spun against me. Rachel, meanwhile, was oblivious. She was still playing the role of the wronged wife, parading her version of events to anyone who would listen. Mutual friends avoided me entirely now, likely believing the garbage she was spreading. Even her mother, who had always been cordial to me, sent a cold text demanding to know why I was ruining Rachel's life. I didn't respond. Let them think what they wanted. Soon enough, the truth would come out. A week later, Alan and I filed our counterclaim. The emails were front and center, along with bank records showing that Rachel had been funneling money from our joint account to cover what looked suspiciously like hotel stays and lavish dinners. She had been playing me for a fool long before her one-night pass request, and now she'd have to answer for it in court. The filing must have caught her off guard because she called me that evening, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Eric, we need to talk." "Oh, now you want to talk?" I replied, barely masking my disdain. "I thought you were too busy slandering me to have a conversation." "Don't be like that," she said, her tone tightening. "I just think we can settle this like adults, without dragging it out." I almost laughed. "Settle? You mean, let you take everything while I roll over and play dead? No thanks." She sighed heavily, like she was talking to a child. "Eric, be reasonable. This is going to get ugly if you keep pushing." "It's already ugly, Rachel. And guess what? You started it." I hung up before she could respond. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of power. She wasn't calling the shots anymore. I was. The next few weeks were brutal. Rachel didn't take the counterclaim lying down. She escalated her smear campaign, telling anyone who'd listen that I was a vindictive husband trying to punish her for wanting to explore her independence. But the cracks in her story were starting to show. Mutual friends who had initially taken her side began reaching out to me, asking for my version of events. One of those friends was Mark, a guy I'd known since college and someone I considered a neutral party. He invited me out for a beer, and I figured it was worth the trip. "So," he said after we'd ordered, "what's the real story here?" Rachel's been vocal, but some of the stuff she's saying doesn't add up. I hesitated, wondering how much to share. But then I remembered Alan's advice. Control the narrative. "Rachel cheated," I said bluntly. "She asked for a one-night pass with her coworker, Josh. When I told her she'd have to leave if she went through with it, she walked out. Now she's trying to take me for everything I've got." Mark frowned, clearly surprised. "She didn't mention Josh." "Of course she didn't," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "But I have proof. Emails, bank records, the works." He nodded slowly. "That explains a lot. She's been acting off, like she's trying too hard to convince people she's the victim." "She's good at that," I muttered. "But the truth has a way of catching up." Mark promised to keep an open mind, and I left feeling cautiously optimistic. Rachel's web of lies was starting to unravel, and I was more than ready to help pull the threads. As the court date approached, Rachel's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She called me at all hours, swinging wildly between threats and pleas for reconciliation. One night, she left me a voicemail that sent chills down my spine. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Eric? You think you've won? Well, guess what? I'm not done with you. You'll regret ever trying to cross me." I saved the voicemail and sent it to Alan. He assured me it would be useful if she tried to paint herself as the victim in court. Her threats were just more evidence of her true character. The day of the hearing finally arrived. I sat across from Rachel in the courtroom, my heart pounding as the judge began to review the case. Rachel looked confident at first, tossing me smug glances as her lawyer outlined her claims of emotional abuse and financial misconduct. But then Alan stood up, his voice calm and measured as he presented our evidence. The emails, the bank records, the voicemail, it was all laid bare. Rachel's expression shifted from smug to stunned as the judge questioned her about the discrepancies in her story. She stammered, trying to explain away the damning evidence, but it was clear she was cornered. By the end of the hearing, the judge ruled in my favor. The house, the majority of our savings, and even her outrageous alimony demands were off the table. Rachel's smear campaign had backfired spectacularly, and now she was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. Outside the courthouse, Rachel caught up to me, her face a mask of fury. "You think this is over, she hissed. You'll pay for this, Eric. One way or another. I didn't respond. I just walked away, knowing that for the first time in a long time, I held the upper hand. But something told me Rachel wasn't done yet. She was too vindictive, too desperate for control. And as much as I wanted to believe the worst was behind me, I knew better. This wasn't the end. It was just another beginning. For a moment, after walking out of the courthouse, I allowed myself to believe it was truly over. The judge had seen through Rachel's lies, and for once, the system hadn't failed me. I could feel the weight on my chest starting to lift. But, as much as I wanted to put this chapter of my life behind me, deep down, I knew Rachel wasn't going to let things end on my terms. And I was right. A few days later, I got a call from Mark. His voice was tense, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure he should be telling me what he was about to say. Eric, you need to see this, he said. Rachel's been posting stuff. What kind of stuff? I asked, already bracing myself. About you. She's been airing everything on social media. Claims you're abusive, vindictive, and, get this, she's saying the reason she left was because you were cheating on her. My jaw clenched. You've got to be kidding me. I wish I was, Mark replied. She's been tagging mutual friends, trying to rally people to her side. Honestly, it's a mess. After hanging up, I immediately logged onto my accounts. Sure enough, Rachel's posts were everywhere. She had written long, dramatic paragraphs about how she had been the perfect wife, only to be betrayed by a man who didn't deserve her. The comments were a mixed bag. Some people sympathized, while others were clearly skeptical. But the worst part? She'd attached a photo of me at a work happy hour from 2 years ago, standing next to a female colleague. Rachel had captioned it, "The real reason I had to leave. Lies and betrayal go both ways." The implication was obvious. She was trying to paint me as the cheater. I didn't waste time. I called Alan and sent him screenshots of everything. She's trying to destroy my reputation, I said, pacing my living room. Can we do anything about this? Alan's response was calm, as always. Defamation is tricky, but we can send a cease and desist letter. If she keeps going, we'll escalate. Good, I said, because I'm not letting her get away with this. Within hours, Alan had drafted and sent the letter. But knowing Rachel, I doubted it would stop her. She thrived on drama, and I had no doubt she'd find another way to keep the chaos going. Sure enough, the next move came a week later, and it was worse than anything I could have anticipated. I was sitting at home, finally starting to relax, when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing on my porch. "Mr. Eric Harrison?" one of them asked. Yeah, that's me. We're here to inform you that a restraining order has been filed against you by Rachel Harrison." For a moment, I couldn't speak. A restraining order? Are you serious? The officer nodded, handing me a packet of papers. "She claims you've been harassing her, making threats, and causing her emotional distress. We're just here to deliver the notice. If you have any questions, you can take it up with the court." As they walked away, I stood there in disbelief, clutching the papers. Rachel was trying to paint me as the aggressor now, using the legal system to turn the tables. It was a brilliant move, evil, but brilliant, and I had no choice but to fight it. The next day, I met with Alan again. He was livid when he read the restraining order. "This is blatant manipulation," he said. "She's trying to preemptively discredit you in case we bring up her social media posts. It's a classic move in high-conflict divorces. So, what do we do?" I asked. "We challenge it," he said, "but it's going to take time. In the meantime, you need to stay calm. Don't contact her, don't react to anything she says or does. She's trying to provoke you, and the worst thing you can do is give her ammunition." I nodded, though the idea of staying calm while Rachel dragged my name through the mud made my blood boil. But Alan was right. Losing my temper would only make things worse. As the days passed, the restraining order loomed over me like a dark cloud. I couldn't even go to places I knew Rachel might frequent for fear of violating it. She had effectively cut me off from half of my social circle, forcing me into isolation while she continued her smear campaign. But then, a breakthrough came. Mark called me again, this time sounding more excited than concerned. "Eric, I think I found something," he said. "Rachel's been bragging in a group chat about how she got the upper hand by filing that restraining order. One of the guys in the chat sent me screenshots. I almost dropped my phone." "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Mark said. "She even admitted she made up half the stuff in the order just to put you in your place." This was the lifeline I needed. With Mark's help, I gathered the screenshots and sent them to Alan. He responded almost immediately, "This is exactly what we needed." At the hearing to contest the restraining order, Rachel showed up in full victim mode, wearing a somber expression and clutching a tissue. Her lawyer launched into a dramatic recounting of her suffering, painting me as a vengeful ex-husband determined to ruin her life. But then Alan stood up, calm and methodical as always. He presented the screenshots from the group chat, along with a timeline of Rachel's actions leading up to the restraining order. The judge's expression shifted as Alan spoke, his disapproval clear. When Rachel was asked to explain the discrepancies, she stumbled over her words, her confident facade crumbling. By the end of the hearing, the judge not only dismissed the restraining order but also issued a warning to Rachel about filing false claims. Outside the courtroom, Rachel confronted me one last time. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "There's no winning in this, Rachel. But at least now, the truth is out." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. For the first time, I felt like I'd truly taken control of my life back. But even as I watched her leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Rachel was the type who thrived on chaos, and I had no doubt she'd find another way to stir the pot. The only question was how far she was willing to go. I knew Rachel wasn't done with me, but I didn't expect her next move to be so calculated, or so personal. A few weeks after the restraining order debacle, just as I was beginning to feel like life was settling down, I got a call from my bank. The voice on the other end was polite but firm. "Mr. Harrison, we've noticed some unusual activity on your account. Several large withdrawals were made over the past month. We wanted to confirm these were authorized." My stomach dropped. "Large withdrawals? What are you talking about?" The representative listed several transactions, all totaling thousands of dollars, to unfamiliar accounts. My head spun as I scrambled to pull up my bank app. Sure enough, the money was gone. Wiped out. "I didn't authorize any of these," I said, my voice shaking. "What's going on?" The representative hesitated. "It appears the transfers were made using your joint account credentials. Was there anyone else with access to that account?" "Rachel." Of course, it was Rachel. I immediately called Alan, who listened patiently as I explained what had happened. "This is financial fraud," he said. "If she accessed your account without your consent, we can file charges." I clenched my fists. "Do it. I'm done playing nice." The next day, we filed a police report and sent a formal notice to Rachel's lawyer, demanding the return of the stolen funds. But true to form, Rachel denied everything. She claimed she had no idea what I was talking about and accused me of trying to frame her. But this time, I had an ace up my sleeve. One of the transactions had been made from a computer logged into Rachel's personal email account. The bank was able to trace the IP address, and it matched Rachel's home address. The evidence was airtight. When Rachel found out I was pursuing legal action, she snapped. Late one night, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You've taken everything from me, and now you're trying to make me look like a criminal?" "Rachel, you are a criminal," I said, my voice steady. "You stole from me. Did you really think you'd get away with it?" "I wouldn't have had to if you weren't such a pathetic excuse for a husband," she shouted. "You're weak, Eric. You always have been. That's why I had to find someone else to make me feel alive." Her words stung, but I didn't let her hear that. "You've already lost, Rachel. Keep digging your hole. It only makes my case stronger." She hung up, and I sat there in silence, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. No matter what she said, I wasn't going to let her break me. Not anymore. The case against Rachel moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming, and her lawyer must have realized there was no point in fighting it. Eventually, they offered to settle. She would return the stolen money and pay additional damages if I agreed to drop the charges. Alan advised me to accept. "You've already won, Eric. Dragging this out won't help anyone." I agreed, though part of me wanted to see her face the full consequences of her actions. But I knew Alan was right. This wasn't about revenge. It was about finally breaking free from her toxic hold. On the day the settlement was finalized, Rachel sent me one last message. It was short, bitter, and exactly what I expected from her. "Rachel, enjoy your hollow victory. You'll never find someone as good as me." I didn't respond. What was the point? Her words didn't carry the weight they once had. Instead, I deleted the message and blocked her number. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally move on. In the weeks that followed, I began rebuilding my life. I reconnected with friends who had distanced themselves during the chaos and started focusing on myself for the first time in years. Therapy helped me process everything Rachel had put me through, and slowly but surely, I began to heal. The best part? Rachel's smear campaign had backfired spectacularly. Once people learned the truth about the cheating, the lies, and the financial fraud, her carefully crafted image crumbled. The same friends who had once believed her turned their backs, leaving her isolated and bitter. A few months later, I heard through the grapevine that Rachel had lost her job. Apparently Josh, her one-night curiosity, had been promoted to her boss, and their relationship quickly fell apart. Rumor had it she'd been caught trying to manipulate company funds, and they'd let her go quietly to avoid a scandal. I won't lie, it felt good to hear. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because it was proof that karma had finally caught up with her. Rachel had spent years tearing people down to build herself up, and now she was reaping what she'd sown. As for me, I'm doing better than ever. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine again, and that's more than enough. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that sometimes the best revenge is simply moving on. Rachel thought she could break me, but in the end, she only freed me from her poison. And for that, I'll always be grateful.